Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hey everyone, you're listening to the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you're all good. My home river is just starting to wake up now. The gaps between the rising fish are still pretty wide, but it's getting better. That having been said, this is being recorded on the 4th of May, and we've just had, as everyone has in the UK, some pretty miserable weather. It feels like autumn at the moment. Wind's been howling, the rain's been falling, the river's come up a little bit. I'm fishing with a couple of friends tomorrow. We're going to cast some rods, we're going to play with some fly lines, and perhaps we might even catch a fish or two. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm excited that my guest today has fished all his life, mainly on the loon. He is a casting instructor and is a drummer in the band Hardfire, who have had 2 #1 albums, amongst many other accolades. There is loads to cover, from fishing, casting and music. So I'd like to introduce Steve Kemp to the podcast. Steve, it's great to have you here, buddy. How are you doing?
Yeah, cool, mate. Great to be here.
Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. And when I was doing my research into this, I was thinking about the first time that we actually met. And it was when you were taking your casting instructor's exams, and we did some casting together. And I was trying to remember how long that was now. And it's a little while now, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think it was maybe 2009, something like that, maybe. I might be misremembering. I'm not sure. But it was, was it still in the 90s? Something like that, around there. What did you think it was?
I think it was something around, like you, kind of felt it was probably around that sort of time. But it was really, really cool and the really nice thing, I always remember that you sent me a really nice email afterwards saying, oh, just to let you know, thanks for the help. And I passed, which was really cool to hear as well. And it must have been a fun and exciting process.
Yeah, it was. So for those of you who don't know, like when you take these particular sort of casting instructor, exam type of things, you have like a provisional first. So this was my provisional one, where you could become like, a provisional member before taking your kind of proper exams and everything else. And I was pretty nervous, and I remember bumping into you, and you were a very calming influence before I went and did it, which was nice.
Yeah, it was fun to do. And like you say, that first step is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because the work that goes into that moment really is a lot of time, isn't it? And I think sometimes people perhaps maybe get the impression that they sort of kind of turn up and do the exam. They can fish a little bit and assume that they just turn up and do the exam. But there's a hell of a lot of more work that goes on in the background, isn't there?
Yeah, there's loads. You've got to obviously. So they're always a bit weird. I like talking about these things to people who they don't even know like what fishing is. Like they don't know what fly fishing is. They don't certainly know that you can be an instructor and a guide and things like that, right? So when you say, oh yeah, you become a fly casting instructor or a fishing instructor, and you have to take these exams so that you can do it and have insurance and all this kind of stuff, it can blow people's minds. So people have no idea that you can do that, and they don't know what's involved, but you kind of get tested on all your, they have to make sure that you can actually like teach the stuff that you're going to teach people, and then do it to a standard that is way above what they can do. And so you have to practice your casting, and you have to practice, if you've fished for ages, but you've never really taught anyone how to do it, you get used to practicing how to talk people through certain casts, and then, look at faults in their casting and like fishing strategies and things like this, and be able to fix them and stuff like that. And if you haven't really, sometimes people have been doing that for some time beforehand, just without really thinking about it. And sometimes you've never done it before at all. So you have to really practice that stuff first. It's not just, oh, you go and can you fish a bit and can you cast a bit? And, okay, yeah, I can. You've got to, it's like a teaching thing is what it is. So they're testing you on your ability to be able to teach something, which is, a different kettle of fish. So I'd practiced for ages. Yeah, I'd practiced for ages, and I'd been helped by a guest from a couple of podcasts ago, Brett O'Connor. He'd helped me on the kind of the road to doing this provisional. So I'd been working on it for, I don't know how many months, a good 6 months or something before I'd shown up. I had it in my head that I was going to do it for at least that time, and I'd probably been working on it for about that time, which I was practicing pretty much every day, or at least around that. So yeah, a lot goes into it, I guess. I mean, it probably depends on who you are and what you think it is, but for me, a lot went into it. So I was pretty nervous on the day, which again, like, blows people's minds. They're thinking it's just fly fishing. Why are you nervous? And you're nervous because it matters, right? You're nervous because you want to do well, and you want these people who you look up to and stuff to tell you that you've done well, and you want to pass and all that kind of stuff. So just like any other kind of exam that you've worked for, I was super nervous. And I remember standing by the river. I think I was practicing on the grass at that point, just sort of warming up. And you kind of like came over and were quite a calming influence on me, I think. So I always remember that.
Mm-hmm. That was cool. And it's lovely to see you become almost sort of like a brotherhood, don't you? Once you've sort of passed that, and it's one of those things that we've all been through, and you know exactly how it feels. And I was exactly like you, that I was working. I had a level 2 at the time and wanted to go the other route as well, and because I was working in it, like you say, it meant so much to me anyway, the sort of person that I am. But also, I'd get up and the wind's blowing. Oh, I can't cast for a bit, or I can't cast as well. I can't do what I want to do. So you're consistently thinking about it the whole time, aren't you? And it's something, like you say, the pride aspect of it, but it's something that means a lot, and to get to that, and to, like you say, the recognition from the peers and the people that you look up to means a hell of a lot, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. So for some reason, I wasn't obviously, playing in a band professionally at that point. It was in and out of being on tour and everything else. I think we were working on our third album maybe at that point. So I wasn't working in fishing. I wasn't taking people on a river and like going fishing with them and charging them money and all this kind of stuff. I've just got this thing where if I like something a lot, I like teaching it. It doesn't matter what it is. I could be good at tiddlywinks and I'd want to show people how to tiddlywink better. Do you know what I mean? It could be anything. And I didn't know that you could be, like, for years before I even really know that you could be that you could teach people to do this stuff. I just thought that the people who taught were kind of like these amateurs who just sort of showed up and helped out because they were good at it or something like that. I think it was only going to game fairs and stuff when I got a little bit older with my dad that I realized that you could get these guys who can show you what to do. And because, I liked it, I was like, well, I want to teach it. And then because of that, I wanted to be good at it. So like going and doing these exams and stuff and being, doing what everyone else does seemed like a good thing to do at the time. And, I certainly haven't regretted it. I do enjoy it, and I do actively teach people how to do it now. I did actively teach people how to do it then, Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. I suppose it's just something that you're into, right? And you like to pass it on to other people. And that's why I did it. I got real geeky with it as well. I tend to get a bit geeky with stuff. So I got real heavy into the casting elements of it and some of the real geekier bits of the fishing and all that. And, I just like to impart that stuff, I guess.
Yeah. And that's, to me, is a really, really important and interesting point as well, because you could be the best fly angler in the world, but you may not be able to teach people. And that's, to me is, I would much rather, if I were hiring a guide, want somebody who has the ability to get on with people and to explain things to people in a language that they can actually understand as well. And, what you were saying there about wanting to understand it and wanting to teach it, I think is a really valid and interesting point. And, I used to get a lot of phone calls from people saying, I want to be a guide. I'm really good at fishing and stuff like that. And I think I may have covered this on previous podcasts, and apologies if I have. But, I'd say to them, well, how do you feel if you've got somebody next to you who's throwing the line in the tree consistently and there's a bloody great big trout rising? How does that make you feel? Do you think you'll be okay with that? And if you're thinking, no, that's not for me, if that's, I'd want to be making that cast, then that's probably not the job for them. And that's interesting you touch on that it is about having that passion for the teaching aspect of it as well, isn't it? Rather than just something that you can earn some money from.
yeah, maybe I'm just like a nosy Parker or something. But I remember way before being, even thinking about being any kind of like instructor or whatever, seeing someone just not being able to cast properly on a still water somewhere and just going up to him and being like, "Yeah, let me help you out a bit," And like sometimes people don't want you to, so you've got to approach that really, really carefully. But often if you offer, I could maybe give you a bit of a hand here if you wanted, and then if you do that and they say no, then you just walk away, obviously. But I'd done that a bit, and beforehand, just because I wanted them to be able to enjoy it too. So if I saw someone trying to catch the trout and they kept getting in the trees, instead of thinking that I want to cast to that fish, I probably would be like, I want to help them do it. I don't know. Yeah, that's just kind of like how I'm wired, maybe. So it all makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're going to just, before we circle around, we talked about when we first met, and like you say, the adrenaline was pumping. And what I try and do is if I'm teaching them or whatever it is, a little bit nervous, that I try and change the subject a little bit to get them not to think about things too much and just to let everything flow. And I said to you, "Oh, what do you do?" And you said you're a drummer, and I stupidly said, "What, in an orchestra?" And then you told me the band you were playing in, and I said, "Oh, actually, I love the Specials," which I've mentioned about. That meant a lot to me. And then I was doing some more homework and saw that you'd actually worked from Jerry Dammers, who was the mastermind behind the Specials. How cool is that?
Yeah, pretty. I mean, cool for me as well. I was always been a big Specials fan. I'm really lucky that in my kind of career, I've got to play with these like really legendary people, and I've met a lot of people, and I've been to a lot of different places. But meeting people and chatting to them who've written like some of the songs that you really, really love and stuff like that. Look, whether it's Jerry Dammers from the Special, or Paul Weller, or Mick Jones from the Clash, like just to totally name drop for a minute, these people who I really, really respected and looked up to. It's really, really, really cool to be on stage with them and to do stuff with them. We had some rehearsals with Jerry Dammers. He was kind of the guy who he wrote the songs. He was kind of like the guy who was the guy who was behind the production, and the real sound of the Specials kind of came. A lot of it came from him. They're all amazing musicians and stuff in their own right, but a lot of that drive comes from Jerry. And when we had a rehearsal with him, because I think we were playing, I can't even remember what we were doing now, but we were playing with Jerry Dammers either way. And we had like a couple of rehearsals with him. And he was, during the rehearsal, before we started, he was kind of apologizing. "Oh, guys, I don't really do this anymore." Playing in a band, he obviously produces and does DJing and stuff like that these days, mostly. "Oh, I haven't really done this anymore. I'm going to be all over the place. I'm not going to be able to do it," and all this kind of stuff. And about a minute into the rehearsal, I think we were playing a song, and he just stopped us, and it was like, "No, let's do that again, boys." And then just like went into this. He was just completely in control of the rehearsal in about 1 second. Like it was completely obvious who was in charge, and we all loved it. We just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And it goes to show the kind of like musician that he is, I suppose. He's that kind of like he's kind of the boss of it when you're playing stuff. But to experience that, same thing with Paul Weller. We had rehearsals with him, and he did the same thing. It was super interesting and super important as a musician to be able to do that. So that's pretty cool. So not in an orchestra.
Yeah, yeah. Is it kind of like fishing in the sense of, the musicians that we sort of kind of know each other, but at a completely different level? That you kind of, you're in the same industry, so you know what you're doing roughly there or thereabouts. Is it kind of similar in that sense that, you're interested in what each other are doing, and there is contact outside of your particular sphere and your band, that you're sort of bump into other people, or like you say, rehearse with people? Is it similar in that sense?
Sort of yes, and sort of no. So you wouldn't just rehearse with people just for the sake of it. You would only do it if you were actually rehearsing for something, and you wouldn't get to play with people like them. They're not just available to like have a laugh with. You've kind of got to be doing something that they're interested in, right? It's kind of like, it's a little bit different in that way. you obviously see a lot. If you're playing in a band that's kind of doing well, you'll do a lot of the same things. You'll do the same TV as everyone else. So you'll be on all the same TV shows. You'll be playing the same festivals. You'll be playing the same sort of circuits. You'll see each other a lot. So you'll get to see all of the other bands that are kind of doing a similar thing, like quite a lot. So you might hang out in that sense, but you don't really get together and have like a big jam session or anything like that. That just doesn't happen at all. Your music is really, really separate. So you definitely hang out and have a drink and have a chat and chit chat outside of music or whatever, but you wouldn't like randomly be having a rehearsal with a different band or something. It just doesn't tend to work like that at all. That part of it tends to be really closed off and really private, which is why being allowed into like having Jerry Dammers playing with him, you get a like a look at his world, right? The world of playing in the specials, or the world of like playing with this musician, and you see what that was like. It gave us a real taste of that, which is why it was really exciting. Because we're geeks, right? Like I'm a bigger geek for music as I am for fly fishing, for sure. Like probably even more so. So you're just fascinated with all this stuff. So I guess it's similar in a way, in that you do like mix with people, but it's also not similar in the sense that you don't have like a friendly cast with them or something like that you might do at a game fair or something. You might hang out with someone and have a bit of a cast later. You just don't pick up a guitar and start like playing along with Mick Jones. You just don't do it. So yeah, sort of similar, but sort of different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, funnily enough, I was thinking of game fairs and other things where you just say you casting to whoever's about and just do that. And it would have been kind of cool in my little mind that perhaps a little bit of that goes on. And I'm a real geek for it. And I was watching, for some reason, something about Fleetwood Mac yesterday and about how members joined the band. And it was because it was a sort of a community. Hey, they may be good. I think it was Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined latterly because they sort of knew each other from the circuit. And I guess that there was a part of that. And, if I've had guides working with me that not in the same level or sphere at all, but, people sort of say, hey, do you want to come and do some guiding? And I kind of wondered from a band point of view if it's sort of kind of almost insular in that sense, that if somebody's been around on the circuit.
It is insular, yeah. That's it. So Fleetwood Mac would have probably been touring or something. I don't actually know the story behind this, but I can guess, and Stevie Nicks would have played in probably a different band, and they would have supported Fleetwood Mac or something like that, or they would have played a gig that they happened to be at, and they'd have seen her and been like, well, we quite like her. And then they would have just poached her from the other band. That's probably what happened. Happens to drummers a lot. Like, let's say that you're a support act. So like the main band are headlining and you're the support act, and they're not particularly happy with their drummer or something like that. They'll look at the drummer in the support band or another drummer on a circuit that they like that aren't quite as in a bigger band as them, and they'll just poach them. So that's kind of how it works from that scene. It's more like they've seen someone who they like, and then they're asking them, "Do you want to join our band?" And then they're like, "Well, yeah, okay, I do."
Nice. Let's come back to fishing. And you live in London, and I was always aware of a cool casting thing that went on in London when the River Thames dropped back, and wondered if you can tell me a little bit about where it was and if you still go. And I got the sense people were throwing spey rods in. There was some particular place, but I don't know the full story.
Yeah, so it was in Putney, and there was like a kind of. It's good that you've actually brought this up, because I don't think it's happening anymore. Or at least it's not. I haven't been part of it for a while, and it's something that I would really, really like to resurrect. It was kind of just like a London like spey casting club, if you like, right? There are a lot of salmon fishermen in London who have to travel further afield to get any salmon fishing, because you can cast on the Thames, obviously, but salmon fishing on it would be pretty pointless. And yeah, so that was that cool sort of like casting thing. But as far as I know, it's not really happening. It was one of the guys from Farlow's. One of the guys who works at Farlow's was kind of the organizer of it. But it's something that I was thinking about trying to resurrect, or trying to like start again my own version of it. where we just like a few people who are interested in that kind of stuff got together and did some kind of casting. Spey casting works because you've got enough room for it. You've got loads of room on the Thames. It's really easy to get out there and wade in it, and it's a pretty good place to practice spey casting. So it's pretty cool like that. So I have thought about that, but there was a scene for that. It was probably more than 10 years ago now. If it is still happening, I don't know about it. And if it isn't, then it might be time to start putting some feelers out and make it happen again. I think that would be cool.
And is that somewhere where you've done lessons and stuff with people? Because I guess being in London, it's a little bit more tricky to find somewhere to take someone to go do some lessons and stuff.
It's actually not that bad, It's actually not that bad. So it depends on what kind of lesson that you're teaching. Obviously, if you're the way that I do lessons, we don't go straight into kind of like the fishing stuff straight away. If they're a complete beginner, let's say that you're a complete beginner, the first lesson for me is it's different when you're a guide, because your job as a guide, I mean, I don't need to tell you what a guide's job is, but like you might have a different idea of it. But for me, if they're giving you some money to be taken to be put over fish, right, and try and catch those fish and stuff, and you got to do that by hook or by crook. You got to get them on those fish and everything else. For me, from like a casting instructor, fishing instructor kind of situation, what I want to do is, if they're a complete beginner, start with like a foundational sort of lesson, right? Here's how to make some movements that can end up making you be able to put a fly over a fish. You know what I mean? So like very much a foundational kind of a lesson. We can do this on grass. If it's like trout fishing, that often lends itself quite well to that. And if it's like, salmon fishing or spey casting or whatever, then we've got a lot of water actually in London, especially on the tidal Thames. As long as you can understand the tides and when it's a good time to get on there on low tide and stuff, you've actually got a lot of room for teaching fly fishing. And then when it actually comes to, if you are going to take someone fishing, then you're like very, very limited, right? You can't do that on the Thames unless you want to catch the odd chub or something. So if you want to go trout fishing, you've got like either some very, places like some small fisheries, and then bigger reservoirs like at Walthamstow and stuff like that for trout fishing. You are very limited in what you can do fishing wise here in London. But to teach people how to do it or to get grips with it, you've got plenty of space for that.
Cool. Let's take you to would it be fair to say that your home water is the Loon?
Yeah, that is the home water, definitely. It's 5 minutes walk from my house. So we grew up in the same place. We never moved. I moved to London when I was 17, but all of the years before that were spent mucking around on the Loon. I actually learnt to fly fish. It was between the Loon and I used to fish the Loon obviously all the time, but used to fly fish when I first started on like just a little hill town, like kind of in the South Lakes. So where I'm from is a place called, it's a village called Halton on Loon, as it makes sense because the river runs through it. And for those who don't know the geography, Lancaster is a very northern city in the top part of Lancashire. So just before, you're like 10, 15 minutes from Cumbria, basically. So you're into the South Lakes quite quickly. And it's like so it used to be this hill town that I kind of grew up fly fishing in, which my dad used to be a member up there of this little place. And I think I learned how to do it there. And so it's between there and the Loon, basically. Yeah, it was a cool lake anyway. You used to walk up this like horrific hill to get there. And then you kind of went over the brow of the hill and you could look down onto this little tarn and used to be able to see fish rising and stuff like that. It's still like a super magical place for me. A really, really cool place. And it was good to have that sort of that still water side of things. And then the Loon itself is a good trout river, especially the kind of the upper reaches into Cumbria. It flows out of Cumbria and straight through like Halton and Lancashire. So in the upper reaches, definitely like Paul Proctor, I think fishes there a bit and catches some. Well, I mean, he catches amazing trout anywhere he goes, doesn't he? But there's definitely some nice trout in the Loon. And so it used to be a decent sea trout river. and it's a bit up and down these days with salmon fishing, but it used to be a cracking salmon river as well. So classic spate river, classic game fishery. Doesn't have grayling in it, doesn't have any of that stuff. It's just trout and salmon really. And yeah, so I grew up between those two places basically.
And you spent a lot of time, I guess, on the river, on the tarns, fishing. Were there other forms? Was it fly fishing for you from the start, or were you sort of doing some coarse fishing as well?
I did a little bit, but I think I started with fly fishing. I think I'd caught a fish in that tarn on a fly that I tied myself, by the age of, I don't know, maybe even 10 or something like that. Pretty young, like tied my own fly, caught my own fish, that kind of thing. So I did do a bit of coarse fishing just because where I'm from, everyone goes fishing. Like there's not much to do. So it's like fishing, shooting, or just like, not, but you'll do one of those two things normally. There's a bit of coarse fishing that goes on, but fly fishing was always the thing that I haven't done any coarse fishing with, like the kind of coarse fishing tackle now for, since I was about like 12 or something. And I didn't even do that much. It was a little period where I kind of like got into it, but fly fishing's been my major gig through my entire life, I think. My dad used to do it, or my dad does do it. And so that's why I think I just copied what he did, really. Fishing with wet flies.
Right, yeah. Would it be fair to say that your dad was your mentor for fishing then?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, he introduced me to it. I can't even remember. I just remember being fascinated with it. Like, I've got a brother and a sister, and they don't care at all. My brother he's not interested at all. But I was. I was obsessed with it, in fact, as a kid. Absolutely obsessed. Everything about it, everything. Like I was, fishy when I was a kid for sure. I was just interested. You can't walk over a bridge without looking over and all that kind of stuff. And I honestly don't remember getting that. I just remember it being a thing. I can't remember when that started. I just remember it being a thing. So I would have got it from him for sure. But I must have shown some interest, and he must have just taken me up there or something, or taken me. I used to go down the river when he was salmon fishing and just sit and watch him. Yeah, and then obviously at some point we went up to that tarn, and he showed me how to do it a bit. I can't remember that either. I can't remember him teaching me or anything. I was probably really quite young, so I don't have that memory. I just remember being able to do it. That's pretty weird, isn't it? Actually, I can't remember the first time I did it at all. I can only remember being able to do it. So I don't know when he taught me at all, but he would have been the one who showed me how to do it. And sort of taught me where fish would be and how to fish them and stuff. And it was all wet flies. I don't think I did anything that was not wet fly fishing until I was about, I don't know, like 14 or something. I don't think I did anything that wasn't wet flies. I thought that was what it was, and then I discovered that there's other stuff, right? But I didn't discover that for a little while. Yeah, interesting. But yeah, no, I was just sort of reflecting on how interesting it is that I can't remember starting. I can't remember at all. I just remember being able to do it. Weird.
Nice. That's the great thing about it. Yeah. And when did salmon come on the scene for you?
So Dad would go salmon fishing as well on the loon. I wasn't a member there, so I didn't do that until I was a bit older, just because I didn't really have the access to it. I didn't have, to get. There is day ticket water on the loon, but my dad was a member on a part of it, and so I just used to go with him and kind of sit there, and sometimes in horrible conditions. Sometimes when the water was up, it was like windy and wet and stuff like that. I'd just go and like sit and watch him salmon fish. Kind of weird, I suppose, but I didn't get into doing it myself until I was a little bit older. But that used to be amazing on the loon. Like sometimes because it's a spate river, it's up and down really, really quickly. So a bit of rain and up it comes. And sometimes you'd be able to just you'd be sitting there by the river in Halton, you'd see it rising, and then you'd just see these fish start coming in, um, but you could just, because salmon don't just swim up, like they jump out and they make themselves known. Sometimes you can spot them, right? And they're just acting like, like this like platoon of salmon sort of like coming into the river. I just remember being massively excited by that. So yeah, but salmon was a bit later for me. Trout fishing was kind of the first thing, and it's the thing that I do the most now as well, because of just because of access. I think if I lived at home again, I'd be salmon fishing much more often, but I don't. I live in London, so to actually go salmon fishing, you've got to take a trip somewhere else, and it's a little bit harder to do.
So where do you go living in London now? Where do you go for your fishing fix?
So, I am a member of some of these little stocked lakes, as well as one in particular, which is like 10 minutes away from my house. And without that, I really wouldn't, and I know that some people really don't like small still water sort of fly fishing, and it's probably not my number one thing either, but it's better than nothing. And you can still make a good day of it if you know what to do. And it's especially good in the summertime for you can get there at 6 o'clock and you can stay till it goes dark. You can just put 2 hours in or 1 hour in or something like that. And I need that. I need that in my life. If I don't have that, I'll go mental, So I can do that. And then there's the bigger reservoirs like Walthamstow and stuff. You're within driving distance quite easily, within an hour and a half away from, again, big still waters like Buell and places like that are in Kent. You can get over there pretty easy. And then for river fishing, I know there are a few people who fish in London. There is a chalk stream in London, for those that don't know, called the Wandle. And there are trout in there. But honestly, I've never, not once, fished it. Because whenever I've gone to scout it out and have a look, I just haven't been bothered. I've been like, nope, not for me. So I'm lucky enough to be a member of Salisbury and District. So down in Salisbury, again, I can get there. For me, if it's within 2.5 hours, like that's not a big deal. Living in London, you get used to traveling taking longer. So even to get over one side of London from the other, that can be more than an hour. So at home, if I had to drive 2.5 hours to go fishing, like at home, I mean, like living back in Halton in Lancaster, you'd never do it. That would be ridiculous. That would be the biggest drive of all time. But your frame of reference gets changed when you live in London because things just take longer to go to. So making a drive for a couple of hours to me to go down to Salisbury or somewhere to fish chalk streams is not a big deal. So I do that pretty often. And then if I want to, I can either go home and fish the loon as well. If I ever go home, I'll do that. And then sometimes I'll travel maybe up to the River Wye or something like that to try and catch some salmon and what have you. And I can get there in less than 3 hours, 2.5. That's probably pushing it. Less than 3 to get to a decent beat on the Wye for salmon fishing. So London, it kind of sucks from a fishing point of view. When you've been used to having a river literally 5 minutes away from your house or having these lakes 20 minutes away and all this kind of stuff. But you've got to deal with it. So you just do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like you've got a nice selection of places that tick all the boxes with, like you say, it's not too big a drive, and because we love it, we do it, don't we?
Yeah, I've had worse. It's not that bad. I've got friends who don't think twice about just getting up at 4 a.m. and driving to Scotland, and salmon fishing and then just coming back down again. So if it's in your blood, you're going to do it, right?
Tell me, when you're touring, do you try and get some fishing tied in then as well? So, if you're going to a particular country or you're going somewhere, do you scout out some fishing ahead of that sort of leg of the tour and think, yeah, actually I can make that work and I can go fish a little bit then?
Yeah, I do. It happens less than you'd think. And the reason for that is because tours, the way that they're set up, there's just not as much downtime as you'd imagine. You've got to, if you get a day off, it's often in a city. And then sometimes the fuss of like finding somewhere in a city. So like in London, if you were to find some fishing in London, there would only be a bit in a really specific area. And that's the same in most cities. So you're rarely in places that actually have it, which is annoying, but that's just how it is. I have done it in I found myself with days off in Perth before, and obviously went fishing then in Perth, caught a load of fish. In fact, that was pretty cool. I've no idea what they were, but they were there and they were biting, so that was cool. I've been fishing on a boat for tarpon in Tobago, because I had a day off in Tobago, and I was like, well, what fish do we have here? Oh, tarpon, great, let's go and catch them. I didn't catch one, I hooked one, but it shook itself off, so I was a bit annoying, but it was my one and only time that I've been tarpon fishing. So I will look for it and I will do it if it's possible, but more often than you'd think, it's not possible, or it's a real pain in the ass to try and get to. I always took a rod with me. I had one of these rods that was like, went into like 8 pieces. It was only about this big, like suitcase size. So you take one of them, or even a couple, you got like a 5 weight and an 8 weight or something, and then you're pretty covered for any situations. But very often you can't get out. And I take a practice rod as well. Usually there's a few of them on the market nowadays, but there's one by a company called Echo, which was like it's got this little soft kind of cord that you can cast around and practice with and all that kind of stuff. I spent a lot of time practicing for instructor exams whilst being on tour and stuff with that. So I'll do what I can, but I would love it if we could just take days off in places and you could just go fishing, but very often you just can't. The good thing is that you get quite a bit of downtime in between making albums and being on tours and stuff like that. So sometimes we just have a month off, or something like that, and then you could, you fill that time with whatever you want to. You go wherever you want. So then you get lots of time. You can be on the water every single day if you want to. So it's ups and downs, I guess. Most people have got to work. Most people have got jobs. Most people have to fit fishing around that. Even people who are, casting instructors like me, they still got to make a living usually. So we're kind of all in the same boat. It's just very often they'll be next to water which they can get on quickly, and I have to make do a little bit. But in touring's kind of the same. Definitely in the studio though, when we're making. No, sorry. So when we're in the studio, so the studio is in Ashford, which is just outside of Staines. At Hardfire, we're kind of, well, not famous, but like famous for being from Staines to a certain extent. And there's fishing around there as well. There's a couple of still waters and bits and pieces. So it was easy during the album to be like, oh, what are we doing now? Vocals? Okay, laters, and you'd go fishing and come back in 4 hours when it was my time to do something, So that was, you can find it if you look for it, right? And if you make it important, you can do it. But you're also, you're often in places where you're there to work. We've found ourselves on tour in like Portland and places like that before, when I've been like, we've just been through it, and I've even seen a couple of rivers, and I've been like, oh man, if we only had some time here, I could be like steelheading and trying to do all this sort of stuff. We've been to various places across the world where we've actually driven past or been in an area that's got really like outstanding fishing, but there's nothing I can do about it. I can't plan a tour around where we stop and wait. That's done for me. I just don't have that kind of authority to do that. Time costs money, right? So that's kind of how it works, unfortunately.
Cool. I sort of kind of like the idea of downtime ahead of a gig, and you can just sort of go catch a few fish and then go to the concert, and the contrast between what I assume is an incredibly hectic life and the ability to get away from that as well would have been cool. But you mentioned Tobago and tarpon there. Were you fishing with Kester?
No, I don't know who that is. No, sorry. No, I was fishing with, who was it? I can't remember who it was now, but I was in a boat with someone. Maybe it was. I don't know, but I found it. We worked it out, and I got out in a boat with someone. We gave it a go.
Nice. Yeah, no, I fished with Kester down there, and he had a yellow Toyota pickup with bonefish painted on there, and was a cool guy. And I always remember him because we found some permit, and they were tailing, and he went into the praying position as I made the cast at the fish, which they did. Permit did as they always do. They buggered off. which I thought was a great cast, and I covered them. I caught some baby tarpon and bones with him and stuff, but the permit were a little bit elusive. But it's quite an interesting destination to go fish, and it's the sort of place that you can fit around a family holiday as well, or with a friend or partner or whatever who doesn't fish as well. So I kind of liked that. It's a pretty cool location, isn't it?
What goes on the road stays on the road. You know what I mean? My brain is mush when it comes to remembering these things. Who knows what we've been doing the day before? But yeah, sometimes my memories are a little bit fuzzy with this stuff. But I definitely got out and I definitely tried to catch tarpon and I definitely failed. But we gave it a go.
As you should as well. That's fantastic. Did you find as the ban started to take off, did you find fishing had to go on the back seat for a bit? But also, I guess, as I alluded to previously, was it also when you were able to go a bit of a release from everything else that was happening at the time?
Yeah, it's really, really unique. It's the most sort of tropical place I've been, if that makes sense. We were recording a video there. And we were filming it on the beach and in all these different locations and this kind of stuff. We had all these locations that we had to go to in this day to film this video, and then we got one day off either side of it or something like that. So that's what I did with my day. I went fly fishing. Yeah, no, it absolutely was. Everything goes on the back burner when you're doing. If you start being successful, every second of every day pretty much is dedicated to that. So every single thing in your life, whether it's your family or your friends, if you're in a relationship, if that's relationship, whatever, every single thing goes on the back burner. There's just no two ways about it. Once you get busy and it's your first chance at doing something, right? So it's your first album and it looks like it's going to do well. If you're not committed to that, you will fail. You'll not, you won't get there. So every single thing in your life goes on the back burner. And you don't really have any downtime. I think we were on tour for about 18 months on that first album, pretty much constantly touring. I still managed to do some fishing for sure because I remember it. But it was when I could, it was absolutely when I could. But I've always been the kind of guy who's I'm pretty in there with fishing, right? So I was reading about it, I was thinking about it. I was still reading. I think I took Bob Wyatt's first book with me, when we went on tour, and I was reading that and stuff like that. So it's all still in there. It's still ticking over all the time. But I'm not actually physically doing it. But fishing is one of those things that you can take with you, even if you're not doing it, because you just can't do it. You can't do anything when that happens. This is your one chance to make it. And so you've got to give it everything. That's just what it is. But you can still think about it.
Yeah, great book, Bob Wyatt's one as well. Trout hunting.
Yeah, the trout hunting, that's it, the first one. I've got the other one as well. He was a big influence on me, in fact, in terms of a lot of stuff about fly tying, and I really enjoy his writing. And so that was nice that would be like my little tour bus read. Which sounds weird, but I'm sure you're aware of there are a lot of bands who actually do this. One of the most funny ones is one of the guys from Iron Maiden. I think it's one of the guitarists from Iron Maiden, and he's a coarse fisherman through and through. And there's a thing about him talking about it, and just the difference between what they're doing, because they're obviously playing stadiums and things like this, right? And he's like, well, one day you're on stage, in front of 50,000 people or whatever at some stadium gig playing Number of the Beast. And he's like, the next day you're sitting here next to a lake, catching gudgeon. It just made me laugh because he's actually fishing for gudgeon, which I just thought was funny. But the difference is you're just a person on the bank, right? Iron Maiden, those guys are if you're into heavy metal music, those guys are so ridiculously famous and so ridiculously big. And yet there he is still going and setting up his little waggler or whatever next to some still water, catching little gudgeon, and he did it because he needed to, so yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there a point where you realised that things were really starting, you were into something special, and had that, like you say, that 18 months of touring? Did you realise something was really starting to happen there? And can you remember what it felt like when your first album went to number one, what that feeling must have been like?
It was actually pretty surreal. We were in America at the time, and our album had gone to number one in the UK, and it was amazing. But we sort of just didn't have time to like stop and think about it because we were on the road. We're doing like that night we had to go and play some. I think we mentioned it to the crowd. It was like, hey, our album's just gone to number one, and they were like, okay, cool. We've never heard of you because we were playing America at that time. No one knew who we were. Um, so it was kind of weird. It was weird, but you did see the momentum coming before that. So we would be when we started to go on tour. At that point, we were playing gigs to we started playing like really small gigs, and then we were selling out these gigs for like 400 people, and then it was 800 people, and then it was like once we got to the ones where we were selling out gigs to like 800 people, and people were wearing our t-shirts and they knew the lyrics and stuff. That was still pretty weird. It was like, whoa, hang on, this is something's happening here. And then you got on the radio, and then your videos were on. At the time, MTV was still a thing, and all this kind of stuff. Top of the Pops was still a thing. You got invited to. That was when it was really like, whoa, this is snowballing. You get invited to be on Top of the Pops or something like that, which was kind of crazy. And you could just see it escalating. You could just see it. That was kind of an exciting time because none of us knew what was going to happen. We weren't successful yet, but we could see that something was building. And it got to the point on that first album where we ended up doing a tour where we sold out. We sold out this whole tour, but we did 5 Brixton Academies back to back, and that's like, I think people who don't know what Brixton Academy is, it's just a big venue in London, and I think it's like 7,000 people or something like that. We did five of them back to back, and then sold the rest of the tour out as well, and that was all within the space of doing these gigs to like 400 people. And it was literally like 12 months later that we got to that point. So it was a pretty crazy thing to sort of experience. After we came off tour and like had a little bit of downtime between that and starting to go and look at making the second album, I didn't know what planet I was on. I had no idea. That's where fishing became quite useful as well, because it was useful to do something really grounding, because you just had this experience that was mental. It was useful to have that sort of like that grounding thing to go back to, you know. Like not comparing myself to anyone in Iron Maiden. Obviously, they're a different universe to us, in terms of how big they are. But he goes, he was talking about it. Like I say, he goes fishing for these little coarse fish and stuff, just because it's probably a very grounding thing for him. It's something completely separate to what he was doing yesterday, and so it was important at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting that, and I'm sure there's many other offshoots of this, but with musicians, there does seem to be an affinity with fishing and fly fishing as well. If I look at our little world as well, isn't there? And there's always been a link between the two, which has been interesting and lovely to see it continuing as well. But it seems to be, doesn't it, from Eric Clapton to wherever, there's always been a Roger Daltrey and many others, Fergal Sharkey, who's obviously been a guest on here as well, that there's always been a link there, hasn't there? And do you think it is, as you've been alluding to, that grounding aspect of it, the walking away from that and just being with you and the gudgeon or the trout or the salmon or whatever it is? Do you think that's one of the main reasons for it?
I think so, yeah. I think it's just, I don't know their particular stories. I don't know if they got into it before they were, famous with music, or they got into it during that time, or got into it afterwards. But for I think one of the things that they like you say, like being grounding. If you're used to being around people all the time, gives you an opportunity to go and like be on your own sometimes on the river, and then to do something that takes your mind off everything as well. So if I'm trying to catch a fish, so I'm not thinking about anything else, like absolutely nothing else. I don't stop and start thinking about what's going on in my life or anything. I'm like, literally, it's me there's a fish in there. I'm going to catch him. Like I forget to drink water. I forget to drink water. I forget to eat. I forget everything when I'm doing that. I just, I'm in like absolute hunter mode. And so I think people like that. And when they maybe if they've done it before they were famous from doing music or whatever, like Eric Clapton and Fergal Sharkey and these kind of people who had like amazing careers, I think they carry that with them, and they remember it. And I think if they get into it whilst they're, doing music, whilst they're being like these famous people, and I think they just find something where there's this element of solitude and I don't want to use the word mindfulness, but like a different place that you can go to, right? That's one of the things that I like about fishing. It's not the only thing, but it is rivers especially, or some certain lakes. You can really take yourself away, and kind of, that's a useful thing when you're around people all the time, or when you're busy all the time, or touring all the time, or whatever, or in the studio sat with people all the time. It's useful to be able to do that.
Yeah. Tell me, have you ever given a lesson to someone and they've clocked you from the band, or suddenly said, "Do I know you?" And has that ever happened before?
No, it's not. I don't think. I don't think it has happened, and I wouldn't tell them either. So I remember I was giving a guy a lesson in January, and it was the day before we were going on tour somewhere. And he was trying to learn to cast like an 8-weight rod for bonefish or something. So we were just focusing just on casting. So we're doing it on a field because you can, if the wind's coming in one direction, you can turn against that wind and practice casting in a different wind conditions and all this kind of stuff. And we were hitting targets and we were doing all this kind of stuff, like trying to teach him how to be a decent saltwater kind of caster, And I didn't tell him anything, but I also remember like it was freezing, right? There was snow on the ground and it was absolutely freezing. And I did sort of think to myself, like, you don't have to do this, Steve. But like, I was there because I wanted to be, so I was kind of enjoying it. He didn't know who I was. He just thought I was a casting guy, which at that moment, that's exactly what I was. I'm no more, I was no more important than anyone else. But yeah, no, that's not happened. I think we used to be on a program which was on Sky Sports quite a lot, which was called Soccer AM, which was like a football program. And whenever we were on that, people used to recognize me then. That was about the only time that I'd get recognized, because when you're the drummer, you're not that obvious, you're just not, right? You're sitting behind drums. But that was the only time. So I think one day that I actually taught someone to fly fish. I think someone recognized me on the way to doing that, because we'd been on Soccer AM that morning. I think we were on Soccer AM in the morning, and then it was like casting instruction in the afternoon kind of thing. So I think I did get recognized once on the way to it, but never by someone who I was actually teaching. They didn't have a clue.
Nice. You're both a salmon, as we said, and a trout angler. Tell me, do you prefer casting a dry fly on a 3-weight or making a long single spey on a 14-footer? What's your favourite?
Yeah. Well, it is a good question. I'm gonna say that it's the like, the single spey on the 14-foot sort of salmon rod, the double-handed rod. But the reason for that isn't because I think it's a better cast or anything like that. But if you go trout fishing, right, and especially if you're casting like a 3-weight or something, you can often see the fish, or kind of where you're casting to. And so it's more focused on, right, okay, especially if it's a rising fish or something like that, you're not really thinking about the cast, you're just doing it. Yeah. You kind of like, you're in that automatic, I need to drift this fly over this fish to make this work. And I'm not really going to think about how it happens. I just know it's going to be quite automatic at this point. Whereas if you're salmon fishing, so what I'm saying is I'm enjoying the trout taking the fly aspect. I'm enjoying the getting that right, getting my drift right and everything, and getting that fish to take. I'm enjoying that part a lot. In salmon fishing, very often it's not the same thing, right? You're just kind of having a good estimate of where this fish might be. Maybe you can see him, maybe you can't. Often you can't. So if you don't enjoy that casting, salmon fishing will be the most boring thing of all time because you're going to make a million casts. You can not make a cast in trout fishing for ages because you're trying to find a fish or you're watching one or something like that. But you don't do that in salmon fishing. You don't just stand there looking at the water. You'll never get anywhere. You've got to start casting. You've got to start doing it. And you've got to be, if you don't enjoy that aspect, it becomes about making a good cast for me, right? It becomes about casting. And if I catch a fish, then great. So it's the different focus, which is the thing that I like. And because of that, that actually determines how I salmon fish as well. Like I'll still use like mid belly lines and long belly lines and things like this sometimes just to make it more fun. Just because I'm like, you know, the chance of catching a fish here is maybe a little bit more slim than it would be if I was on a chalk stream and there's a trout there, I can probably catch him, and look, there's another one. Yeah, probably he's going to probably, especially if I'm like chucking a nymph at him or something like that, it's probably going to happen. Salmon fishing is probably not going to happen. So if you don't enjoy the casting, you're going to have the worst day of your life. Have you found that with trout fishermen? They take up salmon fishing and they're like, "Wow, this is boring," or do you find that they don't?
That's a really interesting point, actually, and an interesting question, because there's a couple of things. I find generally, not always, that trout fishermen who pick up a salmon rod, you know what's going to happen there. It's all going to be dominant one hand to start with when they pick up the double hander for the first time. But they make, in my humble opinion, better anglers because they've had to go through that process of trout, if they're coming from trout to salmon rather than direct to salmon. So I think there's that aspect of it. It may be, and when I was guiding, I'd have somebody say, "Look, the water's right, let's have a quick go for salmon." And you're dead right. You'd get somebody saying, "Oh, we've not caught any." And I said, "Well, I didn't, the water's right. I can get you onto a trout. Salmon, I can put you in the right position, whether we've got one there or not." And sometimes that would happen. So, and you can detect, right, okay, perhaps I shouldn't pursue this too far because they obviously feel they're going to catch a salmon and they haven't caught a salmon. So managing expectations as a guide is a really important thing as well. But yes, there will be sometimes elements of that. And what you said about the casting thing is dead true. And I always remember Emma, when she started, her system was, yeah, I'm going to make a nice cast. I'm going to make another nice cast. I'm going to see if I can string together. And she improved her fishing exponentially because of that, and concentrated, like you said, on that. Right, I'm going to get this working right. I'm going to get this. So when it happens, I've at least done the fish the honour of casting to it in the right spot and honouring it with a good cast too.
Yeah, and that casting becomes, well, for me anyway, it becomes kind of hypnotic. Because you're making a similar cast, right? Like you're making a cast depending on the way the river's going and the way that the wind's going. That's going to determine what kind of cast you're making, right? And then that just becomes kind of like hypnotic, putting it in the same place. Yeah, nailed that one. Yeah, nailed that one. And the way that I'll salmon fish sometimes is that depends on the temperature of the water, but I'll either start on the top going down, or in terms of the depth of the water, like top down normally in water that's not really, really cold. And if it's really, really cold, like kind of bottom up. So it means if I'm going to go down the same beat or the same run or whatever, I'll go down it a few different times with different techniques, So I'll start the top, right in the top, and then maybe a tiny little bit deeper. And then I'll probably go quite deep and go down the bottom. And so you're using different lines and different systems and stuff. But the goal is always the same, and that's to kind of like cover that water. So you've really got to cover it. Sometimes you have that kind of external feedback that the fish are there. You can see them like top in or jump in or whatever. When a salmon moves into a pool, sometimes it unsettles other fish that are in there and they can jump about, and you've got this kind of feedback. Sometimes you don't have anything. You just got to look at the water and be like, hey, if I was a salmon, I'd be in that spot. And then you've got to put flies over it and hope for the best. And a lot of trout anglers just don't like that, because trout are going to be, it depends. If you're nymphing or something, a lot of people are doing that these days. then you're going to put your fly everywhere basically until you catch something. But if you're fishing with dry flies and stuff, you're waiting for a rise. You've got more feedback, and you're not thinking about casting as much because you're thinking about the trout more. So yeah, that's my answer basically. That's why I like it more, because I like it for its own casting.
Yeah, that's a good tip as well, where you said about going down the pool, working either higher to lower or lower and up. And I remember something, I think it was Topher Brown, whose excellent Atlantic Salmon Magic book is beautiful if you haven't got it or haven't read it, but I'd recommend it. But I think he says it's better to go down a pool quickly and cover it and then come round again and perhaps change things up and go down. And when you said that, that kind of reminded me of it. It's a good tip.
Yeah, I do actually have that book, so I've probably stolen that off him. I can't remember doing that, but it probably in there because he did it. But that's definitely my technique, if you like. Don't be casting over the same spot forever and ever and ever and ever, because with salmon fishing, because you're just, you don't know. Particularly, you've got to try a couple of different techniques. So, like I say, I'll start in the top, and then I might just fishing the surface again with a different fly that you strip, like a sunray or something, and then I might go deeper. These kind of things keeps your day interesting.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about casting, so let's talk about. Have you got a Hall of Fame piece of tackle? Is there a piece that you wouldn't be without, or you've lusted after, or would like, or have you got something like that?
So I try not to be. I'm a guy who can pretty much throw anything away or get rid of stuff. I try not to get attached to things. But in terms of actual tackle that I've got a Sage TCR, which was, I don't know how old they are now. They got to be like 20 years old now, something like that, maybe somewhere around there. And Sage have kind of got these rods that are kind of like these legendary rods and stuff. I think we've talked before that I like the LL series and the SP series and these kind of things. And Sage TCR for me, it's the one that I used for all of my casting instructor stuff. They're kind of like, I still fish with it now. I don't like it as much these days because it feels too stiff and it feels like it doesn't have enough feedback. I don't like that anymore. I think I used to like that when I was back in the day, but I don't really like it now. But I don't think I would ever get rid of that rod, just because it's the only one that I'm letting be, like, I'm attached to emotionally. And there are certain flies, like certain fly patterns that I kind of still have in the box, even though they've way been replaced. Old sort of still water patterns like Zulus and Vivas. The first fish that I caught, remember I told you I caught a fish on a fly that I tied myself at the age of maybe even 10 or something like that. And that was a Viva, which is like a black kind of hackled wet fly with a little red tail on it. It looks like nothing. You strip it like across the top of the water and fish nail it. I think they still nail it probably to this day. But yeah, so I'm fond of those things.
Nice. Yeah, good choices as well. I've still got my TCR. I passed my exams with the Sage SP, and I actually sold it. And somebody said to me and made a very fair point. They said, "Well, you still passed the exam even if you got the rod or haven't." And I think that was a good point. And part of me regrets selling it now because it was a lovely rod. But yeah, it's. I've found that I don't hang on stuff now exactly the same now as I used to, and I'm looking for niche and interesting and sort of left field sort of stuff, and I've made no secret of the fact of bamboo and stuff like that. Have you ever played with that? Would that appeal to you or not?
It doesn't. I see them as tools these days. So I've changed my approach to fishing a little bit. I used to not have that many rods really, and I would have like a 9-foot 5-weight or something like that, and I would do loads of stuff with it. These days I don't do that. If I ever do get to a river, I'm very limited on time usually. So maybe I've got 3 hours. Like I don't have all day to kind of sit there and wait for a rise and all this kind of stuff, where I can use my trusty 9-foot 4-weight or whatever, right? I might have to fish different methods quite quickly. So I tend to approach the water as potentially how a competition angler might do. So I'll have like maybe two, maybe even three rods set up, so I can nymph and I can like do dry flies if that's the case, or I can do, maybe one with like fishing a duo or something like this, depending on the conditions and the type of water and, the temperature of the water and all that kind of stuff. My approach now is to kind of get there and catch all the fish and then go home. That's kind of what I'm trying to do. So for that to work, obviously not everyone can just buy a load of rods, right? So I have to see them as tools, and then they're very replaceable tools, right? So, if there's a new one out, which is maybe a little bit better than this one, then, go on, I'll sell it and I'll get another one and that kind of thing. So that's what I do. And that really changed my outlook. Once you've got multiple rods for fishing one place, you tend not to care about them as much. When you've got the one rod and it's your little friend, you can get really attached to it, which is weird, but like it's just human nature, I think. But no, I haven't fished with bamboo. I haven't fished with fiberglass or any of that kind of stuff. It's very romantic and it kind of appeals to me from that standpoint. But because I fish in that way, the way that I've just described, it doesn't really have a place for me because I can't make it fit into that world.
Good answer. Well, I'll get one in your hands eventually, or I'll try anyway.
Yeah. And then I'll be like, oh God, I'm going to buy one, but yeah, until then.
So you talked about you did some tarpon fishing. You went through Oregon, which I can recommend for steelhead. Is there a dream place? Is there a place that you'd say, actually, yeah, that's the one I would love to visit? And I'll tell you what, I'll give you a couple if you'd like a couple of places.
Two places. It's difficult. I have actually forgotten the names of some of the salmon. I'm terrible with names, so I forget the names of the rivers. But there are some salmon rivers, Atlantic salmon rivers in Canada that are like super, super, super clear water. You can really kind of like, it's almost like sight fishing for salmon. You can see them hanging out, and that really appeals to me. Obviously, the Scandinavian salmon rivers as well, they really, really, really appeal. But it's not the Cascapedia, is it? I can't remember what it's called. I'm so bad with names. I've got the specific.
I think it could be the Gaspi Peninsula, isn't it? Around there, I think the Restigouche, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly, right? They're in there somewhere in our brains, but I can't remember exactly what they're called. But they're as a kind of a salmon destination, just because that just looks crazy to me. And then I don't fish that tarn that I grew up with anymore. And honestly, like if I close my eyes at night, that's a place that I go back to. So I would like to sit there again. Just used to be mental, that place. Used to be amazing, right? If you got there really early in the morning, the fish would be in the margins, and I mean like an inch from the bank, taking like whatever's down there at that time in the morning. Some kind of like, there'd be a lot of pond olives and things like that. So it'd be like the spinners of them washed up on the side of the bank. Fish would be eating them. It's one of the only places where I've really effectively fished daddy longlegs patterns. When the daddies were blown onto the water, fish used to take them in midair. They'd be flying, and the fish would jump out and nail them. It was crazy. It was so much fun. I used to love fishing there, so I'm going to put that in, I think, on the other one, just because I don't go there anymore, and it's a different like syndicate now, so I actually don't have access to it. It's not like some kind of public water that you can just rock up to. You've got to be a member, and I'm not a member anymore, and so I can't get there. And I'd like to go back at least once. I think that would be cool.
That's a really good answer. And that sort of nicely brings us round. We've been chatting for well over an hour now, and that brings us almost nicely full circle, I think, doesn't it? And takes us almost back to the beginning again. And are you still doing tuition and stuff? Is there, if you're looking to do tuition, is there a way people can get hold of you if they want tuition in London?
Yeah, there is. I think you've got to, I don't have a website or anything like that, unfortunately. So I think you've got to go to the Art Guy website. You can probably put a link to me on there. But if you live in London and you want to learn how to fly fish, I'll show you, so get in touch. Yeah. So I am teaching. I enjoy it just as much as I did 10, 11, 12 years ago. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Steve, it's been great to catch up as always. Thank you for taking time to chat with me. And we've covered so many interesting things. I think we've got another hour in us. There was so much I wanted to ask you. But thank you for all the great and interesting and thoughtful answers as well. It's great having you along. Hopefully we'll get you down to Devon. I know we've been talking about it for a long time, and hopefully come
for years. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully you'll be able to come down and come catch some fish, and we'll do some fishing.
Yes, mate. Anytime.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for being guest on the Fly Culture podcast. Everyone, this has been Steve Kemp. Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you, mate.
But everyone, thank you so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast. Thanks, mate, so much.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.